The sun rose slowly over New Terra, painting the farming fields in gold and orange. Sarah Chen stood on her porch, coffee cup in hand, watching the morning mist roll across the wheat fields. She had been the colony's security chief for 3 years now, though most days her biggest worry was keeping the local wildlife away from the crops. The settlement sprawled across the valley like a small earth town. White houses dotted the landscape between green fields. Children ran to school while their parents headed to work in the fields, the processing plant, or the small spaceport that connected them to the rest of human space. 3,000 people called New Terra home, and most of them had never seen real violence in their lives. Sarah's communication device buzzed. "Morning report, Chief," came the voice of Tom Bradley, her deputy. "All quiet on the Western Front. Spotted some of those big lizard things near Sector 7, but they moved on when they saw the fence." "Copy that," Sarah replied. She took another sip of her coffee and smiled. This was the kind of problem she liked dealing with. Simple, peaceful, nothing that couldn't be solved with a stronger fence or a louder noisemaker. Far above New Terra, beyond the blue sky and white clouds, something else was watching the colony. The Zephyrian dreadnought Stellar Dominion hung in space like a metal mountain. Its hull was dark gray, covered in weapon ports and sensor arrays. The ship was 3 kilometers long and carried enough firepower to level a small moon. On the bridge, Admiral Kethvar studied the data streams flowing across his screens. The information about the human colony below made him feel something close to amusement, though his species rarely showed such emotions. These humans were farmers and builders. Their biggest weapons were tools meant for moving dirt and cutting trees. They had no military ships, no orbital defenses, no idea what was coming for them. "Status report," Kethvar commanded. His voice carried the authority of someone who had conquered 17 worlds for the Zephyrian Empire. "All weapons charged, Admiral," his weapons officer replied. "Targeting systems locked on primary population centers. The attack will eliminate 97% of the colony within the first strike." Kethvar nodded his approval. This was how the Empire worked. Fast, brutal, complete. They had perfected this method across dozens of worlds and hundreds of species. The humans would join the long list of races that had learned too late that the galaxy was not a place for the weak. "These humans," said Commander Vextar, Kethvar's second-in-command, "our intelligence says they are soft. They form emotional attachments to their offspring. They waste resources caring for their sick and old. They even keep non-productive animals as companions." "Yes," Kethvar agreed. "Typical mammalian weaknesses. They will break quickly once we remove their primary population centers. The survivors will surrender or flee. Standard pattern." The Admiral looked at the peaceful scene on his main screen. Humans moved about their daily business below, completely unaware that death watched them from the stars. "Begin the bombardment," he ordered. Down in New Terra, Sarah had finished her coffee and was walking toward the security office when her emergency communicator screamed to life. The sound made her freeze in the middle of the street. She had heard that alarm in training, but never in real life. All units," came Tom's voice, tight with panic. "We have multiple contacts in high orbit, large signatures. This is not a drill." Sarah ran to her office and threw herself at the sensor console. The screen showed dots of light hanging in space above them. Big dots, military-sized dots. Her hands shook as she activated the colony's emergency broadcasting system. "Attention all residents of New Terra," her voice echoed from speakers throughout the settlement. "This is Chief Chen. We have detected unknown spacecraft in orbit. All residents should immediately move to designated emergency shelters. This is not a drill. Move quickly, but stay calm." The response was everything Sarah had hoped for and feared. People stopped what they were doing and moved with purpose toward the underground shelters they had built but never expected to use. Parents grabbed children. Teachers led their classes toward the school's basement shelter. Workers at the processing plant activated emergency protocols and headed underground. But there were so many people, and the shelters could only hold so many. Sarah watched through her office window as families ran across the open areas between buildings. They looked so small and helpless under the vast sky. "Chief," Tom's voice crackled over the radio. "I'm reading energy buildup from the ships above us. Big energy buildup." Sarah looked up at the sky. It was still blue and peaceful. Birds still flew between the clouds. But somewhere up there, death was charging its weapons. The first plasma beam hit the center of town. Sarah saw a flash of light, brighter than the sun. Then a column of superheated gas punched down from the sky like the finger of an angry god. The community center, where just yesterday the children had put on a play about Earth's history, simply stopped existing. More beams followed. The spaceport vanished in a burst of flame and metal. The processing plant, where most of the colony's adults worked, became a crater filled with molten rock. The school, thank God, had already been evacuated, but the building disappeared anyway. Sarah ran from her office as the ground shook beneath her feet. The air filled with smoke and the smell of burning metal. She could hear screaming in the distance, but also something else. Explosions, but not from the sky. From below ground, the underground shelters were collapsing. She ran toward the nearest shelter entrance, but a plasma beam struck the ground 50 meters away. The heat wave knocked her down and singed her hair. When she looked up, the entrance to Shelter 3 was buried under tons of rock and burning debris. "Tom!" she shouted into her communicator. "Tom, respond!" Static answered her. The bombardment continued for 20 minutes. When it finally stopped, Sarah found herself lying in a ditch beside what used to be the main road. Her uniform was torn and dirty. Blood ran down her face from a cut on her forehead, but she was alive. She climbed out of the ditch and looked around. New Terra was gone. In its place was a landscape of craters and burning wreckage. Smoke rose from a dozen fires. The peaceful farming community where 3,000 people had lived and worked and raised their children had become a hellscape. But as Sarah stumbled through the ruins, she began to hear voices. Human voices. People calling for help. People answering those calls. People digging through rubble with their bare hands. She followed the voices and found survivors gathering near the entrance to Shelter 7. The shelter had survived, and people were emerging from underground. Dirty, scared, but alive. Children clung to their parents. Adults looked around at the destruction with shock and growing anger. "Chief Chen!" Someone called her name. It was Dr. Martinez from the medical center. "Over here! We need organization!" Sarah walked toward the group of survivors. There were maybe 100 people visible, with more emerging from other shelter entrances as she watched. Not 3,000. Not even close, but not zero either. As she reached the group, a child tugged on her torn uniform. "Chief Chen," the little girl asked, "are the bad aliens gone now?" Sarah looked up at the sky. She couldn't see the ships, but she knew they were still there, watching, probably thinking their job was finished, probably already planning their next target. "No, sweetheart," Sarah said quietly. "But they're going to wish they were." 3 months had passed since the sky caught fire over New Terra. The Zephyrian patrol ship Swift Talon dropped out of hyperspace and moved toward the planet's surface. Captain Mordek expected to find a dead world, ready for mining operations. To begin, instead his sensors showed something impossible. "Captain," his science officer reported, "I'm detecting active power sources on the surface, multiple locations. And, sir, there are structures that weren't in our original survey data." Mordek studied the readings with growing confusion. The orbital bombardment had been thorough. Nothing should have survived. Yet the scanner showed clear signs of organized activity below. "Perhaps some automated systems survived the attack," he suggested. "We'll investigate and shut them down. Prepare a landing party." On the surface of New Terra, Sarah Chen stood in what used to be the town square and was now the command center of something that had no name yet. The crater where the community center once stood had been turned into a workshop. Salvaged metal from the bombardment formed walls and roofs. Equipment rescued from the ruins had been rebuilt, modified, and combined in ways the original manufacturers never intended. "Movement in orbit," called Marcus Webb, who had been a farmer before the attack and was now their best electronics specialist. He hunched over a collection of salvaged communication equipment that somehow worked better than it had when it was new. "Single ship, medium size, coming down fast." Sarah nodded. They had been expecting this. The aliens would come back eventually to see what was left. She activated the colony's new communication system, a network of hidden transmitters built from farming equipment and mining gear. "All teams, this is Control," she broadcast. "Showtime. Remember, we want prisoners, not bodies. We need to learn about them before we can beat them. 800 meters underground, in tunnels that used to be mining shafts and were now something else entirely." Teams of survivors moved to their positions. They wore clothes made from salvaged materials and carried weapons built from tools and spare parts. Most of them had been farmers and teachers and shopkeepers 3 months ago. Now they were something the galaxy had never seen before. Humans. With nothing left to lose and time to think about it, the Zephyrian shuttle touched down in what looked like an empty field. Captain Mordek led 6 soldiers out of the craft, weapons ready. The area seemed deserted, just burned ground and scattered debris. But their equipment detected power sources nearby. "Spread out," Mordek ordered. "Find the source of those readings. Destroy any functional equipment." The soldiers moved across the field in formation, scanning for threats. They were professionals, veterans of a dozen conquest campaigns. But they had never fought humans before. They had never fought anyone who had spent 3 months learning to hate them. The first soldier stepped on what looked like solid ground and fell through into a pit lined with sharpened metal spikes. The spikes didn't kill him, but they held him in place while a net made from salvaged cables dropped over him. The second soldier turned toward his trapped comrade and never saw the camouflaged tunnel entrance that opened behind him. Hands reached out and dragged him underground before he could call for help. "Contact!" Captain Mordek shouted, raising his weapon. But there was nothing to shoot at. The humans had simply vanished, taking 2 of his soldiers with them. "Sir," one of his remaining soldiers reported, "I'm detecting movement below ground, multiple contacts. They're under us." Mordek felt something he hadn't experienced in years of warfare. Uncertainty. His enemies were supposed to stand and fight or run and hide. They weren't supposed to disappear into the ground like ghosts. A voice came from speakers hidden around the field. It spoke in accented but understandable Zephyrian. "Captain Mordek, of the Swift Talon." Sarah's voice echoed from multiple directions. "You are surrounded. Your ship is disabled. Surrender now, and you will not be harmed." Mordek looked back toward his shuttle. It sat exactly where he had left it, but warning lights flashed on his control display. Somehow, impossibly, the humans had reached his ship without being detected. "This is impossible," he transmitted back. "You are primitives, farmers. You have no military technology." "You're right," Sarah's voice replied. "We don't have military technology. We have something better. We have farming technology, mining technology, construction technology, and 3 months of very creative thinking. Now, are you going to surrender, or do we have to show you what a crop harvester looks like when you modify it for a different kind of harvesting?" Mordek tried to contact his ship. Nothing. He tried to call for backup. Static. Around him, his soldiers pressed back to back, weapons pointing at empty air. They could hear movement underground, the sound of metal on stone, voices speaking in human languages they couldn't understand. Then the ground opened up. Humans emerged from hidden entrances all around them, not the soft, weak creatures from the intelligence reports. These humans were lean and hard, with bright eyes and careful movements. They carried weapons that looked like they had been built from spare parts, but worked perfectly. More importantly, they moved like soldiers, real soldiers, the kind that came from experience, not training. "How?" Mordek asked as a human woman approached him. She was clearly their leader, with scars on her face and authority in her voice. "How did you survive? How did you build all this?" "We're humans," Sarah answered simply. "When you try to kill us and fail, we get creative. When you destroy our homes, we build new ones. When you take away our tools, we make better tools. It's what we do." She gestured toward the hidden entrances around them. "You bombed our surface installations, so we went underground. You destroyed our communication systems, so we built new ones from tractor parts and weather sensors. You tried to leave us defenseless, so we turned our farming equipment into weapons. Did you know that a grain thresher makes an excellent projectile launcher with the right modifications?" Mordek and his soldiers found themselves surrounded by devices that looked like nothing in their military databases but were clearly effective weapons. Electromagnetic pulse generators built from atmospheric processors, projectile launchers made from mining equipment, traps constructed from materials that used to grow food and now caught enemies. "You will be treated well," Sarah continued as her people secured the Zephyrian weapons. "We'll give you food, medical care, and comfortable quarters. All we want in exchange is information. Tell us about your ships, your weapons, your tactics. Tell us about your empire and how it fights wars." "Why would we do that?" Mordek demanded. Sarah smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Because you're not the only ones we're planning to catch, and the more we learn from you, the less we'll have to hurt the next group that comes to visit us. You see, Captain, we've decided something important down here in our holes and tunnels." She leaned closer to him. "We've decided that we're not the victims in this story anymore. We're not the poor farmers who got bombed by the big scary aliens. We're the people who survived getting bombed by aliens and spent 3 months figuring out how to make sure it never happens again. Around them, humans worked with quiet efficiency to disable and secure the Zephyrian equipment. They moved like they had done this before, though this was their first time capturing enemies. Everything they did showed planning, preparation, and most importantly, learning. "Your empire thinks we're soft," Sarah said as her people led the prisoners toward hidden entrances. "Your empire thinks we're weak because we care about our families and our friends. Your empire is about to learn that caring about something just means you'll do anything to protect it." She looked up at the sky where the disabled Zephyrian ship waited. "And now we have one of your ships. We have prisoners to question. We have examples of your technology to study and copy and improve. In a few weeks, when your people wonder why Captain Mordek hasn't reported in, they'll send more ships to investigate. When they get here, they're going to find that bombing New Terra wasn't the end of a problem. It was the beginning of a much bigger problem. Because now we know what you can do to us. And soon we're going to show you what we can do to you." The Zephyrian prisoners were led away into tunnels that stretched for kilometers underground. Behind them, humans began moving equipment that shouldn't exist, weapons that shouldn't work, and technology that shouldn't be possible. But it was all very possible. It was all very real, and it was all very human. Admiral Kethvar stood on the bridge of the Stellar Dominion, staring at reports that made no sense. 6 months had passed since the bombardment of New Terra, and the sector was falling apart. "Explain this to me again," he demanded from his intelligence. Officer Commander Vextar pulled up the holographic display showing recent incidents across 3 star systems. Red markers indicated ships that had experienced technical difficulties. There were dozens of them. "It started small," Vextar began. "Navigation errors, weapon misfires, life support fluctuations. Our engineers blamed poor maintenance or old equipment. But the pattern is spreading." The display zoomed in on specific incidents. The heavy cruiser Iron Fist reported complete navigation failure while pursuing smugglers near the Kelvar system. They drifted for 6 hours before backup systems came online. During that time, their cargo holds were breached and stripped of equipment. "Mechanical failure," Kethvar said. "It happens." "Yes, sir." But then the destroyer Sharp Edge suffered a similar malfunction 2 days later. and the supply ship Provision the day after that. Each time, valuable equipment disappeared during the blackout periods. Kethvar studied the pattern of red markers. They formed a rough circle around the space where New Terra had been located. You think these incidents are connected to the human colony we pacified? Sir, there's more. Our occupation forces on 3 different worlds have reported sightings. Sightings. Of what? Humans, sir, on planets where all humans were confirmed eliminated months ago. Kethvar felt his spine ridges tighten with irritation. That's impossible. We have confirmed kill counts for every human settlement in this sector. Yes, sir. But the reports are consistent. Small groups of humans appearing in secure facilities, then vanishing before security teams arrive. They're not attacking anyone. Directly. They're just there, and then gone. The Admiral moved to his personal terminal and called up the tactical database. The New Terra operation had been textbook perfect. Total destruction of surface installations. Confirmed elimination of primary population centers. The few hundred survivors should have died within weeks from lack of supplies and infrastructure. Show me the latest surveillance of New Terra, he ordered. The main screen displayed the planet's surface. Where once there had been neat farming settlements, now there were only craters and scorched earth. But as Kethvar watched, he noticed something odd. Heat signatures in patterns that suggested underground activity. Power sources that shouldn't exist. Movement where there should be only death. Sir, his communications officer called out, "We're receiving a transmission. It's from New Terra." That's impossible. We destroyed all communication equipment. Yes, sir. But the signal is definitely coming from the planet's surface. Kethvar hesitated. This felt like a trap, but he needed information. Put it through. The screen changed to show a human face, female, with burn scars along one side. Her eyes were bright and intelligent and completely unafraid. Behind her, Kethvar could see what looked like a workshop filled with salvaged equipment. "Admiral Kethvar," the human said, "my name is Sarah Chen. I believe you remember me, or rather, you remember trying to kill me and 3,000 other people." "You should be dead," Kethvar said automatically. "Yes, we should be. But here's the thing about humans, Admiral. We're really bad at staying dead when someone tries to kill us. Instead, we tend to get creative about staying alive, and then we get creative about other things." Sarah gestured to something off-screen. "You've probably noticed some technical difficulties with your ships lately. Navigation problems, weapon malfunctions, missing equipment. You're wondering how a bunch of dead farmers could cause problems for the mighty Zephyrian Empire." The Admiral said nothing, but his expression confirmed her guess. "Let me explain something about human engineering," Sarah continued. "We don't just build things to work. We build things to be fixed by whoever has to use them. When your patrol ship landed here 3 months ago, we learned about Zephyrian technology. And we discovered something interesting." She held up a small device that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts. "Your ships are beautiful, Admiral. Elegant, efficient. But they're not built to be repaired by anyone except trained Zephyrian engineers. They're not built to resist modifications by creative minds with too much time and not enough to lose." "What have you done?" Kethvar demanded. "We've learned to swim in your ocean," Sarah replied. "Every time you've captured one of our people, every time you've boarded a human ship, every time you've landed on a human world, we've left you a little present. Tiny devices, microscopic modifications, small changes to your computer systems that don't show up on your security scans." The screen split to show multiple views. Humans working in what looked like maintenance tunnels aboard Zephyrian ships. Human hands installing devices into critical systems. Human engineers studying captured technology and finding ways to improve it. "Your ships are big and powerful," Sarah continued, "but they have maintenance shafts too small for your people to crawl through. Backup systems in places you never check. Redundant pathways through your computer networks that we can access if we're patient and clever." Kethvar realized what he was seeing. You've been boarding our ships, sabotaging them from within. Not sabotaging, Sarah corrected. Improving. See, we don't want to destroy your ships, Admiral. We want to borrow them. And the best way to borrow something is to make sure the original owner can't use it when you need it most. Behind her, humans moved through what was clearly a much larger facility than should have been possible to build in 6 months. They wore uniforms that looked like they had been assembled from pieces of different military organizations. They carried weapons that combined human and Zephyrian technology in ways that shouldn't work, but clearly did. You want to know the really interesting part? Sarah asked. We're not trying to conquer your empire. We don't want your territory or your resources. We just want to make sure you never bomb another colony full of farmers and children. She leaned closer to the camera. So we're teaching you a lesson about what happens when you attack humans and leave survivors. We're showing you what we can do when we put our minds to it, when we get motivated, when we get angry. The transmission began to break up with static, but Sarah's voice remained clear. Your empire has been conquering worlds for centuries, Admiral, but you've never fought anyone like us before. You've never fought a species that treats impossible odds as a personal challenge. Every ship you send into this sector, we learn from. Every patrol you dispatch, we study. Every technology you deploy, we copy and improve. We're turning your own strength against you, one small modification at a time. The static increased, but her final words came through clearly. You bombed us, Admiral. You tried to kill us all, but you failed. And now you're going to learn what happens when you make humans angry, and then give them time to think about it. The transmission cut to static. Kethvar stood in silence for a long moment, studying the dead screen. Around him, his bridge crew waited for orders. But what orders could he give against an enemy that had infiltrated his ships without being detected? How could he fight an opponent that turned his own technology against him? Sir, his tactical officer reported, I'm showing anomalous readings from our own systems. Minor fluctuations in navigation and weapons control. Kethvar felt ice form in his chest. Run a complete diagnostic. Check every system. Look for any modifications or unauthorized devices. Yes, sir. But, sir, if there are human infiltration, devices aboard this ship, and we haven't detected them until now. The Admiral understood the implication. If the humans could modify the flagship of the Zephyrian fleet without being detected, then no ship in the Empire was safe. No base was secure. No operation was beyond their reach. For the first time in his military career, Admiral Kethvar faced an enemy that couldn't be conquered by superior firepower. He faced an enemy that had turned being attacked into an advantage. He faced humans, who had decided that their survival was worth any amount of creativity, risk, and determination. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a thought formed that he tried to push away but couldn't quite dismiss. Maybe bombing New Terra hadn't been the end of the human problem. Maybe it had been the beginning of something much worse. 1 year after the bombardment of New Terra, the Zephyrian Empire made its final decision. Admiral Kethvar stood before the Supreme Council of the Empire, delivering his report on the human situation. The infection has spread beyond our ability to contain, he reported. 17 worlds show signs of human infiltration. Our fleet effectiveness has dropped by 40% due to technical failures. 3 of our major shipyards have been compromised. Supreme Leader Zarthek listened, with growing anger. The Zephyrian Empire had conquered half the galaxy by being decisive and thorough. They had never allowed a problem to grow beyond their control. How many humans are we talking about? Zarthek demanded. Intelligence estimates suggest fewer than 10,000 active infiltrators across all affected sectors, Kethvar replied. But they reproduce quickly and adapt faster than any species we've encountered. 10,000. Zarthek's voice carried disbelief. 10,000 primitives are causing this level of disruption to our empire? Yes, Supreme Leader. But these are not the same humans we initially attacked. They have learned. They have evolved. They have become something we did not anticipate. The Supreme Leader stood and activated the holographic display showing the galaxy. Green areas represented Zephyrian control. Red areas showed human contamination. The red was spreading. "Then we end this permanently," Zarthek declared. "We mobilize. The Grand Fleet. We attack their homeworld. We eliminate every human in the galaxy, starting with Earth itself." Kethvar felt a chill of uncertainty. "Supreme Leader, perhaps we should consider negotiation. The humans have shown they respond to..." "Negotiation?" Zarthek's voice cut through the Admiral's words like a blade. "We do not negotiate with prey animals. We eliminate threats to the Empire. Mobilize every ship. 2,000 vessels. Planet killer. Weapons. We will turn Earth into an asteroid field and end this problem forever." 3 weeks later, the Grand Fleet of the Zephyrian Empire dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of Earth's solar system. 2,000 ships arranged in perfect attack formation, carrying enough firepower to crack a planet's crust and boil its oceans. Admiral Kethvar commanded the fleet from his flagship, but as their sensors began mapping the system, he realized something was wrong. Very wrong. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "I'm detecting massive energy signatures throughout the system, multiple orbital installations, defensive platforms, and sir, there are ships. Thousands of ships. The main display lit up with contacts. What should have been a peaceful solar system full of soft humans looked instead like the most heavily defended fortress in the galaxy. Weapons platforms hung in space like metal flowers. Asteroid bases bristled with missile launchers. Hidden among the planets and moons, ship after ship powered up and revealed itself. "How many ships?" Kethvar asked, though he dreaded the answer. "At least 5,000, sir. Maybe more. They're still appearing as they drop stealth systems." A communication signal reached the fleet. Kethvar hesitated, then accepted it. The face that appeared on the screen was familiar. Sarah Chen, the survivor from New Terra. But she looked different now. Older, more confident, wearing a uniform that combined elements from dozens of different military traditions. "Admiral Kethvar," she said, and her voice carried across 2,000 Zephyrian ships. "Welcome to Earth. I see you brought friends. Surrender. Now," Kethvar demanded, trying to project confidence he didn't feel. "You are outnumbered and outgunned." Sarah smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "Admiral, you've been fighting the survivors of one small farming colony for a year. One colony, 800 people. Now you want to fight the species that built 1,000 colonies across the galaxy and spent 10,000 years learning how not to die when something tries to kill us." The display behind her showed Earth, but not the peaceful blue world from the intelligence files. This Earth was surrounded by defensive installations that stretched from the planet's surface to the edge of the solar system. Weapons that looked like they had been built from captured Zephyrian technology, but improved and enhanced beyond original specifications. "Bold choice," Sarah continued. "Let me show you what you're really facing." Space around the Grand Fleet suddenly came alive. Ships that had been invisible moments before revealed themselves. Not just human ships, but Zephyrian vessels that had been captured, modified, and improved. Weapons platforms that shouldn't exist opened fire with technologies that combined the best of both species' engineering, but the humans didn't attack. To destroy, they attacked to disable. Precision strikes knocked out weapon systems without breaching hulls. Electromagnetic pulse weapons shut down ships without killing crews. Boarding pods attached to Zephyrian vessels like mechanical parasites. "What are they doing?" Kethvar's tactical officer asked as his systems showed ship after ship in the Grand Fleet going dark. "They're capturing us," Kethvar realized with growing horror. "They're not trying to destroy the fleet. They're trying to steal it. Human boarding. Parties poured into disabled Zephyrian ships, but these weren't the soft civilians from the intelligence reports. These were soldiers who had learned to fight in the ruins of bombed colonies, engineers who had spent a year studying Zephyrian technology and finding ways to improve it, survivors who had turned catastrophe into expertise. The battle lasted 18 hours. When it ended, the grand fleet of the Zephyrian Empire had become the newest addition to Earth's defense force. 1,600 ships captured intact, 300 ships disabled but repairable. Fewer than 100 ships escaped to carry word back to the Empire. Admiral Kethvar found himself in a cell aboard his own flagship, which was now under human control. The cell was comfortable, well lit, and equipped with everything he needed for basic survival. It was also completely escape-proof. Sarah Chen visited him on the third day of his captivity. "I don't understand," he said as she entered the cell. "You could have destroyed us. Your weapons were effective enough. Why capture us instead of killing us?" Sarah sat in the chair across from him. "Because, Admiral, we learned something important. From studying your empire, conquest doesn't work long-term. Eventually, the conquered rise up and fight back. But there's something that works better than conquest, which is conversion, teaching, showing people a better way to live. You see, we don't want to rule your empire, Admiral. We want to change it. We want to show your people that there's more to existence than conquering and destroying." She gestured toward the viewport where Earth hung like a blue jewel surrounded by defensive installations that had once been weapons of conquest. "Every ship we captured, every crew we took prisoner, every technology we studied, it all taught us the same lesson. The Zephyrian Empire is powerful because it's afraid. You conquer other species because you're terrified of being conquered. Yourselves. You destroy civilizations because you can't imagine any relationship except predator and prey. But humans are different. We've spent our entire history learning to turn enemies into allies, learning to find common ground with people who want to kill us, learning to forgive the unforgivable when it serves the greater good." Kethavar stared at her. "You're going to try to convert the Empire? Turn us into humans?" "Not into humans," Sarah corrected. "Into something better than what you are now. Something that builds instead of destroys. Something that creates instead of conquers. Something that looks at a galaxy full of different species and sees potential allies instead of potential victims." She stood to leave, then paused at the door. "You bombed New Terra because you thought we were weak. You thought caring about our families and our communities made us vulnerable. You were wrong, Admiral. Caring about something doesn't make you weak. It makes you stronger than anything that threatens what you care about. And now we care about making sure no other colony gets bombed, no other children get killed from orbit, no other species gets conquered just because they're different from you. That's going to require some changes in how your empire operates. Big changes. And we're going to help you make those changes, whether you want our help or not." As the door closed behind her, Kethvar sat alone in his comfortable cell and tried to understand what had happened to his universe. A year ago, he had been a conqueror commanding the most powerful fleet in the galaxy. Now he was a prisoner of the very people he had tried to exterminate. And somehow, impossibly, they were offering to save his empire from itself. Outside his viewport, human and Zephyrian engineers worked side by side, modifying captured ships and learning from each other's technology. The sight should have filled him with rage or despair. Instead, for the first time in his military career, Admiral Kethvar found himself curious about what would happen next. 2 years after the bombardment of New Terra, Admiral Kethvar sat in what humans called protective custody, and what he had learned to think of as the strangest prison in the galaxy. His cell had books, art supplies, a computer terminal with access to educational databases, and regular visits from human teachers who seemed genuinely interested in his opinions. Today's visitor was Sarah Chen, though she now held the title of Admiral in something called the New Terran Defense Force. She looked older than when he had first seen her on that communication screen, but there was something different in her expression now. Less anger, more hope. "Good morning, Kethvar," she said, using his name without his military title. It had taken him months to stop being offended by this casual treatment. Now he found he actually preferred it. "Good morning, Sarah," he replied. "I've been reading the reports you provided. The integration program on Zephyr Prime is proceeding faster than your projections suggested." Sarah smiled and activated a holographic display showing the Zephyrian homeworld. Where once there had been massive military complexes and weapon foundries, now there were schools, research facilities, and factories producing tools for construction instead of destruction. "The young ones adapt quickly," she said. "Zephyrian children who grow up learning alongside human children don't see other species as enemies to be conquered. They see them as friends to be understood." Kethvar studied the images of mixed classrooms, where human and Zephyrian younglings worked together on projects he couldn't have imagined 2 years ago. Engineering challenges focused on building instead of destroying. Science lessons that explored cooperation instead of domination. "And the adults?" he asked. "That's more complicated," Sarah admitted. "But we're making progress. Your former soldiers, who volunteer for the reconstruction programs, report high satisfaction rates. Turns out many of them prefer building hospitals to bombing cities." She pulled up another display showing former Zephyrian military personnel working alongside humans on various projects across the galaxy. Medical stations where Zephyrian precision technology helped human doctors perform complex surgeries. Agricultural worlds where Zephyrian environmental control systems helped human farmers grow food in hostile climates. "Why?" Kethvar asked, the question that had bothered him for months. "Why not simply execute us and be done with it? Why spend resources on rehabilitation when you could have just eliminated the threat?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, considering her answer. "Because we learned something important about ourselves during that year you spent hunting us. We learned that we're at our best when we're building something instead of destroying something, when we're solving problems instead of creating them." She gestured toward the viewport where New Terra could be seen in the distance. The planet looked nothing like it had before the bombardment, but it was green again, living again. "When you bombed New Terra, you created a problem. How do we stop this from happening again? We could have solved that problem by destroying your empire, but that would have created new problems. Other species might have tried to fill the power vacuum. We might have become conquerors ourselves. Instead, we chose a different solution. We decided to change your empire from within, to show you that there's a better way to live than constant warfare. And in doing that, we discovered something about ourselves, which is that we're really good at turning enemies into allies. It's one of our best skills as a species. We've been doing it for thousands of years on Earth, and now we're doing it on a galactic scale." Kethvar thought about the reports he had been reading. Former Zephyrian worlds that had been converted from military bases to research centers. Conquered species that had been freed and invited to join a new kind of alliance based on cooperation instead of domination. Technologies that had been developed for war being converted to peaceful purposes. "The Empire is gone," he said. It wasn't a question. "The Empire as you knew it is gone," Sarah agreed. "But something better is taking its place. The Galactic Cooperative Council. Multiple species working together, sharing technology and resources, solving problems that no single species could solve alone." She activated another display showing the structure of this new organization. Humans provided innovation and adaptability. Zephyrians contributed precision and organization. Other species added their own unique strengths to the collective effort. "Your people serve in leadership positions throughout the cooperative," Sarah continued. "Zephyrians are natural administrators and engineers. You're good at large-scale organization and long-term planning, skills we need for managing a multi-species civilization." "And what about you, Sarah? What's next for the survivor of New Terra?" Sarah looked out the viewport toward the planet that had started everything. Construction ships moved around it, building new installations. Not weapons platforms this time, but research stations and communication hubs. We're building a memorial, she said, for the 3,000 people who died in the bombardment, but also for everyone else who died during the Empire's expansion, all the species that were conquered, all the worlds that were destroyed, all the potential that was lost to unnecessary violence. The memorial will serve as a reminder and a promise. A reminder of what happens when species choose conflict over cooperation, and a promise that we'll do better in the future. Kethvar was quiet for a long moment. I was responsible for those deaths on New Terra, for the bombardment order, for following Empire doctrine without question. Yes, Sarah said simply. You were. But you're also responsible for what you do next, the choice you make now about who you want to be going forward. She stood to leave, then paused. We're starting a new program next month. Former military officers from various species working together to develop conflict resolution protocols, ways to solve disputes without warfare, methods for preventing the kind of tragedy that happened on New Terra. We could use someone with your experience in military strategy and command structure, someone who understands how destructive conflicts start and how they escalate, someone who's seen both sides of the equation. Kethvar looked up at her. You're offering me a job. I'm offering you a chance to help build something better than what came before, a chance to make sure that no other admiral ever has to give the order to bomb a colony full of farmers and children. After Sarah left, Kethvar sat alone with his thoughts. Through his viewport, he could see ships moving between the planets of the system. Human ships, Zephyrian ships, and vessels from a dozen other species, all working together on projects that benefited everyone. 2 years ago, he had been Admiral Kethvar of the Zephyrian Empire, conqueror of worlds and destroyer of civilizations. He had given the order to bomb New Terra because the Empire demanded it, and because he had never questioned whether the Empire might be wrong. Now he was simply Kethvar, a former military officer learning to think about problems in new ways. Learning to see other species as potential partners instead of potential targets. Learning that strength could come from building relationships instead of just building weapons. The humans had taken everything from him: his rank, his fleet, his empire, his old way of thinking. But they had also given him something he had never expected: a second chance. A chance to be part of something constructive instead of destructive. A chance to help make sure that no other species would ever have to experience what the humans had experienced when their sky caught fire and their children died. He activated his computer terminal and began composing his first report for the Galactic Cooperative Council's new conflict resolution department. There was work to be done, problems to solve, a better future to build. And for the first time in his life, Kethvar found himself excited about what tomorrow might bring. Outside his window, New Terra turned slowly in space, green and alive and growing, a world that had died and been reborn. A symbol of what was possible when beings chose hope over fear, construction over destruction, forgiveness over revenge. The memorial being built in orbit would carry an inscription visible from space, written in the languages of every species, in the cooperative. Here ended the age of conquest. Here began the age of cooperation. From the ashes of what was lost, something better grows. Never again will we choose destruction when we could choose creation. Never again will we choose fear when we could choose hope. And in smaller text, added at Sarah Chen's personal request, you bombed us. You tried to end us. Instead, you taught us how much we could endure, how much we could forgive, and how much we could build together. Thank you for the lesson. Now let's make sure no one else ever has to learn it the hard way.